Hi guys, so for my small group lesson with my students, I'm in third grade, so I have third graders, and we've been learning about the branches of the government. And so my first small group lesson I did with them was just on the basic information on the branches of the government. So my central focus was the branches of the government, who they consist of, and what their roles are. The content standards was the government strand, role and systems of the government. For my pre-assessment, basically students were introduced to this topic with an introduction video. It was very brief. And then a series of pre-assessment questions. And those questions were asked before the video. And those questions were, do you know what the three branches of the government are? Do you know who makes up each branch of government? And do you know what each branch of government does? And a lot of the students could name the branches of the government, but not so much of what they did. So it was interesting to see what they knew before this lesson. So the goals for the learners, for my students, is for students to have a better understanding of the government as a whole. The learning objectives are students will be able to list each branch of government. Students will be able to describe what each branch of government does and who it consists of. So for my management plan, rules are pretty straightforward. They are to raise their hand on their Google Meets. They have a little raise your hand icon to ask questions, and to stay muted unless it is their turn to speak, and to stay on task. For reinforcement, reminders will be given if they are falling off task or breaking a rule. We want to have fun with this lesson, but it's also important to stay on task and to follow the directions that are given. For limits, when a student interrupts, when it's not their turn to speak, or they unmute themselves to speak when they're not supposed to, they'll just be reminded to stay muted until they're told to speak by the teacher. So the academic language, the vocabulary terms that students were to know during this lesson were government, legislative, judicial, executive, Supreme Court, President, Vice President, House of Representatives, and Congress. So for my formative lesson, students will draw a basic concept map of their understanding of the three branches of the government. This may include words and illustrations. So they can, use pictures. I encouraged them to use pictures. So adaptations, I don't really have any students that I have needed to give adaptations for, but if I did, this is probably what I would do. If students who had fine motor skills and had a difficulty, using a utensil, such as a pencil, they can work with a partner. They can tell their partner, they can brainstorm ideas together, and, the student can say, hey, I really think this should be included, and then maybe their partner could do the drawing aspect of that. And then students who need adaptations may also say to their teacher what they would draw and describe it. So they could then, branch out with their teacher and say, I really think this, and this would be included in my concept map, and this is why. So students will be graded on their content. So did they list all three of the branches of government? And did they include a description of each branch and who it consisted of? So for my formal summative assessment, students will take a Google Forms assessment based on the content from this lesson. Sections will include true or false and terms from the lesson. And students who may need more time taking their assessment may be given extra time to complete this if they have an adaptation. And then students will be graded on accuracy. So did they correctly get the true or false questions correct? And did they understand the terms and match them correctly? Did they correctly define the term and match that to the definition? So for the instructional strategies and methods, content was shared using Google Slides electronically on the screen so that the students could visually see the content in front of them. Obviously, with being virtual, it's hard, they have to have that in front of them on the screen in order to understand what I'm talking about. So for procedures, and then I'll just kind of read the rationale behind the procedures. So students will first be asked a set of pre-assessment questions. I began with asking them pre-assessment questions to see what they already knew. Students will then watch an introduction video on the 3 branches of the government. We will begin our lesson and content will be shared on the screen for students to visually see in front of them. So I introduced them to the topic with a short introduction video because it included visuals and a brief summary, which I thought would be clear and make more sense in a brief, timely manner to the students. After we have gone over the content, this is when students will be asked to create their concept map of their understandings from the lesson. So a concept map was a fun and simple way to get the students kind of thinking more and to see how they took the content and related it to their own work. They were told to get as creative as they wanted, and they very much enjoyed this activity. We will then share our maps with the class. So sharing each other's concept maps helped students to see what their classmates created and, who kind of thought what, and how, each concept map brought something different to the table. And then content will be shared again, and then we'll discuss what we learned and reflect on the concept maps again. So then the floor will be open for any questions students may have. This may include discussion time. Students took this opportunity very well. They asked lots of questions, and it went great. So having the floor open for questions was a way for me to kind of see if I made sense with my content and to see if they wanted to bring anything else up relating to government, which they did. We talked a lot about it. And then finally, my post-assessment summative assessment was given to students, and they had 48 hours to complete the Google Form assessment, and then they were to submit it to their Google Classroom. Google Forms, I just thought this was a very simple and quick way to see if they understood the content that was given throughout the lesson. It was automatically graded, so they got feedback instantly, and I think it went really well. So for differentiated planned support, students who may need extra time or help may be given the content ahead of time so they can prepare a little bit more for the lesson and activities. So materials, these were needed for the concept map that the students made. Crayons, markers, paper, pens, pencils, really anything to get their creative mind going and to create their best concept map. So my reflection. Students showed a lot of interest in this lesson. They created beautiful concept maps using terms and illustrations to show their understanding of the 3 branches of the government. They participated in discussion questions and were very attentive during the lesson. Students demonstrated enthusiasm for this lesson. They enjoyed learning about this topic, and they really liked relating it to today's world and news. We just had an election, so they kind of liked to discuss that. I think the planning of this lesson worked out really well. I took time to make it age appropriate, where they kind of understood the content and was able to discuss it and relate to it. I know government can be kind of a hard concept to understand because, I don't even really understand how a lot of things work. It's very difficult. So I tried my best to kind of create my activities and create my lesson and my content so that they are able to understand a lot better. So my next steps for student learning, taking what they learned and discussing real-world scenarios and news related to government that is happening in the world today, which, can mean talking about the current president and his staff in the current election, and discussing the current House of Reps and Congress and maybe current laws that are being passed or current cases that are going on right now, current trials. And then for student learning, students were able to learn new content and engaged in discussion. Students were engaged and paid attention during class. During the lesson, they showed enthusiasm towards the content and activity. Screen sharing my Google Slides document was effective and helpful for students to see the content in front of them. It kind of cut off there, but Google Slides and being able to share, I think, was the best way possible. Being in virtual school. The concept map activity was also very effective, and it sparked student engagement and interest because they got to basically take what they learned and create their own illustration, create their own concept map of the branches of the government. Like I said, for future learning, taking that content that we learned and being able to relate it to the real world. So, like I said before, we just had an election. We have a new president, a new vice president, who happens to be a female. So my students loved to talk about that as well. But just kind of taking what we learned and kind of branching out a little bit more and using that to talk about things that are going on in the real world right now. So that was my small group lesson on the branches of the government. I hope you enjoyed, and I just want to say thank you guys for taking the time to listen.